It was 1963. John F. Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald on November 22nd. It was also the year that an appalling truth came upon me that my mom and dad did not have a perfect marriage. They had a terrible marriage. I used to brag to my friends at school that my mom and dad have a great marriage. And in August of 1963, my parents came home about 1 o'clock in the morning from a party. They had both been drinking. I was asleep in my bed, and they started to argue and fight. My whole life went to the pit from that moment on. They told each other to go to hell that night. They said they hated each other. The fighting intensified as the weeks went on. I remember my first counseling session. I was 13, and I was the counselor to my mom and dad. And after about their third straight Friday night of arguing, fighting, throwing things at each other, spewing words of hate to each other, I got up about 2 in the morning. I went and was the referee, and I separated them as a referee would two fighters. And I begged them to stop hating each other. I begged them, why can't you just love each other and start all over again? It was my first major loss that I could really remember. It was a non-death loss, and maybe you've been there with parents that let you down or hurt you in one way or another, or somebody else hurt you. It was the death of my parents' marriage. The fighting intensified. We moved to Houston, Texas. Acne invaded my body. My mom and dad hated each other. I knew nobody in that school. But I want to share with you, when you feel hopeless, sometimes there's hope. Have you ever been hopeless? Are you there now? It was August of '66. My mom and dad had been separated for a few months. My mom was getting drunk every night, but I hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 weeks. And I honestly thought I didn't know if I'd ever see my dad again. He was my hero of my life. Have you been there? Have you been in a situation where you felt like nobody cared, nobody understood? I was there. And it was August of '66, Saturday night. My dad called and said, "Hey, Dave, do you and Richard, my brother, want to play golf tomorrow?" I thought to myself, didn't say it. Well, Dad, of course I want to play golf with you. I haven't seen you in a few weeks. I thought you were dead. You're the one I look up to the most in my life. Yeah, I want to play golf. All I want to do is be with you. Have you ever been angry at somebody you love so much and you couldn't even express it? So the next day, Dad picked us up. Dad picking me up at our house just ripped my heart out and kind of stomped all over it. I don't know if you've been there. We played golf and you know, we went out to lunch and then we played golf. Then we went out to dinner. It's 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, on a Sunday night in Houston, Texas. And we get home and Dad drops my brother and I off. My sister's home from college and my father says, "Well, I'll see you guys later." I said, "Dad, why don't you come in and say hello to your daughter? You know, Ann, you haven't seen her in a couple of months. Mom's not home. She's down the street visiting. Her car's not in the driveway." And he said, "Well, I'll come in, but I'll only stay until your mother gets home. I don't want to upset her." And so that's what happened. He came in, he drank iced tea, and to just set the tone for this night that changed my life back on a right path. My parents had not slept in the same bed for about 4 years. They had argued and fought. They had not lived together for a few months, I think. They had not used kind words like, "I love you, how are you doing, honey?" They hadn't used those words in a few years. My dad is sitting there in this room, and he's to a big chair to my left, and my sister's there over there, and my brother's sitting over here. I'm sitting here. There's a door behind my left shoulder, and at 10 o'clock, my mother came through the door. Mom walked through the door, and she wasn't drunk. Miracle number one. My dad got up to leave, and she said, "Tom, it's okay. You stay as long as you want. You haven't seen the kids in a long time. I'm tired. I'm going to bed." My dad sat back down there. Miracle number two was she didn't cuss him out. She didn't snarl at him. You know, she actually spoke nice to him. So Dad sat back down, and my mother passed him and went to my sister and kissed my sister Ann on the cheek and said, "Good night, Ann, I love you." She went over to kiss my brother. "Good night, Richard, I love you." Kissed him on the cheek. Came to me, same thing, kissed me on the cheek. "Good night, David, I love you." Then she turned and she looked at my dad sitting in this big chair. I had not seen them kiss in 4 years. I had not heard the words "I love you" in years. between the two of them. She went over to my daddy, her husband, and she kissed him on the cheek and said tenderly, "Good night, Tom. I love you too." And she went to bed. The next day was Monday. I was at home alone, my brother and sister at summer jobs, my mother at her job. My dad, of course, had not lived with us for a long time. And about 3 p.m, the doorbell rang. I went to the door. I opened it. It's my dad. He has hanging clothes over his right shoulder. He has a box in his left arm. True story. Every detail I remember to this day. And he said to me, "David, would you help me move my stuff into the apartment?" I said, "Yes, sir." My daddy moved back home. For 27 years until June the 4th, 1993, when Dad died of Alzheimer's, my mother and Dad had a great marriage. They held hands. They slept in the same bed. They loved each other. They treated each other with respect. I just was so proud of them. Many years later, as I got married to Debbie and we started having children, and I was preaching at a church, and I was working on a sermon on perseverance, on not giving up, on not quitting. When you think about quitting, have you ever been there? You wanted to quit. You wanted to quit life, maybe. You wanted to quit a marriage. You wanted to quit whatever, a dream. You've been hurt. You've experienced loss. Somebody died. Somebody hurt you, maybe 30 years ago, maybe yesterday. Have you ever wanted to quit? So I was working on this sermon, and isn't it weird? It had been years since August of '66. This is now like the late 80s. Dad has Alzheimer's, and Mom refuses to leave him. She absolutely refused to leave him in a home. Not that that would have been wrong. She said, "I will never leave him. So you kids might as well stop telling me for me to put him in an assisted living or a home for Alzheimer's patients." She just refused to do it. She almost killed herself taking care of him. And so I'm working on this sermon in the late 80s, and I wanted a present-day illustration of somebody who didn't quit when everybody in the world would say quit, but they didn't quit. And I thought of my mom and dad. Was writing this sermon, and I wanted to use the illustration of my mom and dad not quitting on their marriage when everybody would say quit. And I called my mom, and of course, Dad has Alzheimer's, and it's a Tuesday afternoon. I say, "Mom, I got a story I wrote. I want to read it." So I read her the story I just told you. And I said, "Mom, I got to ask you, is the story true?" She said, "Yes, it's true. Every word is true." And I said, "Well, Mom, what happened?" She said these words to me, and I want you to listen real carefully here. She said, "You happened, and your brother happened, and your sister happened. That's what happened." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you were all upset that Dad and I acted like we hated each other and were separated. Your sister thought about dropping out of college. Your brother thought about not even going to college. But she said, you, David, were the worst. You were the absolute worst." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you were outgoing. You had tons of friends. And then when Dad and I went through this problem, we moved to Houston, you shut down emotionally. You went to your room every night. You closed the door. You didn't have any friends. You were completely a different person. And so I decided," my mom said, "to love your father again, to try one more time to make the marriage work. So I decided to love him, to forgive him. And he decided to accept that love and love me back and forgive me. That's what happened." She decided. He accepted. He decided. They started over. They built an incredible marriage. My mom quit drinking. She became my equal hero of my dad being my hero for years, and Mom, because she didn't quit and she didn't give up. She's way up there with my dad. They're my heroes because they didn't quit. Mark Manson wrote a book. In that book, he says true heroism is defined as one who has no hope, who finds hope. That's a true hero, where all appears hopeless and all appears gone and lost, and you don't think you can get out of bed in the morning, and you just don't know how to take another step forward, but you don't quit. You keep going. You try again. It was 1993 in May. I had seen my father a few months earlier, hadn't seen him in quite a while, and he was on the last stages of life. My brother called and said, "You better get here. Can you come next week? Your sister Ann is coming this week. Can you come after she leaves? Because the doctor said it can be any time." So I said yes. So I went and I stayed a week. It's the last night. Last night I saw my dad alive. He's going to die a couple of weeks later. He hadn't opened his eyes all week. He hadn't recognized anybody. He was in a coma. Mom had to feed him, spoon feed him, trying to keep him alive. And he had stopped eating and all that stuff. And it's my last night there. I'm leaving the next morning. I'm on one side of his bed. She had a hospital bed in their master bedroom. And I'm in that. And Dad hadn't even noticed I'm there. Of course, he didn't know anybody. And he hadn't opened his eyes in probably 3 weeks. And Mom's spoon feeding him a milkshake on one side of the bed, holding his hand, and I'm holding his other hand. And there's oldies music playing on the radio station in Mom's bedroom, and a song from the 40s came up by Benny Goodman. And this song, if most of you have no idea about Guy Lombardo, Benny Goodman, the big band era, right? You have to be my age to even recognize that almost. And you see, Mom and Dad met in World War II. Dad was stationed in New Zealand. Mom lived there. And that's how they met. Before Dad got shipped out, they got married. And Mom, 3 months later, was pregnant with my sister. Dad got shipped out to Okinawa in World War II. And he didn't see my sister for about another year and a half after the war ended. And the 40s music is playing in this oldie station. And this song comes on the radio, and Mom had told me that she kept it on that station because it was the music of their courting years, when they fell in love for the first time. And she thinks it helped soothe Dad. He likes that music, even though it didn't appear like he could hear it. So that's why I got it on. So this song comes on the radio. Mom and I are not talking. She's looking at my dad, spoon feeding him and a wet washcloth on his forehead. And she goes, all of a sudden this song comes on the radio and my mom starts crying. She's not looking at me. She's looking at my dad, and the song's playing on the radio. And I say, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she just ignored me. She's looking at her husband of almost 50 years. And she talks to my dad. She says, "Baby, do you remember that song? That's our song. That's the song we danced to on our first date. 1944. She starts crying. Now I'm crying. My dad, who hadn't moved in a couple of weeks, he hadn't even had any expressions when she said, "Baby, do you remember that song? That's our song, the song we first danced to." My dad smiles. He raises his eyebrow and he smiles at her. That's when I say I heard the angels sing. Hallelujah chorus. Twilight Zone music played. I don't know. I'm not making this stuff up. It's the last time I saw my daddy alive. He died a few weeks later. Today, as I video this, it is my mom's 100th birthday. She was born September 21st, 1923. That's when I'm making this video. I make it to honor my mom for deciding to love my dad again, and to honor my father for deciding to accept that love and forgiveness and give that love and forgiveness right back at Mom. They didn't quit. So I honor them today But the real reason doing this video is to encourage you not to quit. I don't know what you're going through. At Spark of Life, we want to be there for you. We want to let you know that there's always hope. Don't quit. We're there for you if you'll let us. sparkoflife.org. I just want to say thanks to my mom for not quitting on this her 100th birthday. At Spark of Life, there is always hope.